Hi, I'm Ron James with the Center for Ethical Business Cultures and the Opus College of Business at the University of St. Thomas. Welcome. We're here to talk to you today about trends in technology and how are they impacting ethics, especially when there's a breakdown and an investigation needs to occur. We're excited to have with us today as a subject matter expert in the field, Paul Luehr. Paul is a managing director and chief privacy officer for Stroz Friedberg. He's been an expert in this field and has done extensive research. His background spans the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, but now he specializes in working with organizations around the world. Today we'd like to really explore what's going on in this field. Paul, we're excited to have you with us. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about the trends that are going on in technology.
Sure. Especially when you're talking about investigations, we really see three major technical trends that are affecting the work of ethics officers and inside investigators. Those trends tend to center around the use of social media, mobile devices, and cloud computing. So for example, in social media, right now we have about 1.5 billion people using Facebook. And not surprisingly, that's a trend that we see not just in the regular marketplace, but we see in the workplace as well. Mobile devices, for example, are allowed in about 75% of workplaces under what many people call BYOD, or bring your own device policies. And not surprisingly then, social media is being piped into the workplace through these mobile devices and is now part of the everyday workplace. Add to that cloud computing, which allows people and employees to transfer information, sometimes confidential information, from their local desktop out to a cloud account, such as a Google Docs account or a Dropbox account. And there you have a powerful mix of employee conduct and new technology that can both enhance and complicate an internal investigation.
Amazing. A lot of change going on in the world of technology. How does that affect the attitudes of people in the workplace?
That's a great question. And not surprisingly, we see a new type of attitude coming into the workplace, especially with regard to the division between home and work. Those people who are immersed in technology and really have been immersed in technology since the beginning, since birth, are now moving into the workplace, and especially our younger employees are saying they don't see the distinction between work and home so much. And that can raise certain issues with regard to an internal investigation. For example, this confidential piece of company information, does it just exist on my work computer here or the employee's work computer, or is that piece of information unfortunately now also at home, sitting on that employee's home laptop or personal device?
Sounds like it's very complex and even getting more complicated. I guess the question I have, Paul, is how does this impact an investigation that needs to be conducted? What new concerns do we have to have as we're thinking about conducting an internal investigation?
Well, first of all, I think when you're conducting an internal investigation, you need to be mindful of the sheer volume of information or data that's now involved. We're no longer talking about a piece of paper here or there or a full banker's box, but we're talking about an explosion of information that may be implicated in your investigation. And this is even more true when you start adding in the component of cloud computing. For example, in the old days, you would think about maybe a single memo that's deposited on a single laptop. But when you add all the devices and cloud computing to the equation, now that very important smoking gun memo may be on this laptop, maybe up in the cloud, maybe on a mobile phone, maybe on an iPad that can connect to the cloud. And in some cases, because the cloud is dispersed internationally, that same memo might be here in the United States, might be in India, where we have an outsourced facility, or it might be in the EU. And all of those locations and the sheer volume of information have pretty dramatic effects on how you're going to conduct your investigation in the first place.
Wow. So, Paul, this has got to raise certain policy questions that organizations or leaders need to be concerned about. What would be some examples of those in your mind?
Sure. Uh, a good way to think about this is in that old journalism framework: who, what, where, when, sometimes why. So who owns the information is a good question to ask. Where is that information deposited? How is that information collected? And when is it appropriate to go out and grab that information, or on a proactive basis, maybe monitor the employee in the first place? And a lot of these questions are contextual. So for example, a video camera, entirely appropriate in most circumstances to have that placed outside the front door of a business premises. But it would be a breach of privacy under most people's ethical framework to have that same video camera placed in a private space such as a restroom. So that the who, what, where, when, why questions are very important to ask. Along with that, when you've collected the information or you're thinking about the information, there are three parts about data that I think are helpful in an investigation. And thinking, is this appropriate for me to capture in the first place? One is around collection. For what purpose was it collected? How was it collected? The second is around use. How did I tell my employees I was going to use this information in the first place? For example, did I tell them I may go after your home phone because in this particular investigation, their home phone is implicated in a business decision? And thirdly, disclosure or sharing of that information. Am I now going to share that information with a business partner, with senior officials, maybe with law enforcement? So the collection, the use, and the disclosure are important factors to consider along with those who, what, where, when, and why questions.
Paul, this is a very complicated and complex area, and you've given us some great insights about the impact of technology on how we conduct internal investigations when there's been an ethical breakdown. What advice and counsel would you offer for organizations as they begin to wrestle with addressing internal investigations?
Sure. So I would give recommendations in three general areas. One is around employment policies, another one is around security, and another one is around litigation strategies. When you're talking about employee policies, I think it's a great time to go back and take a fresh look at your employee handbook and look at the policies and, excuse me, and procedures that you may have around the use of this new technology, and see whether you have appropriately addressed the ways that people are using this technology in the workplace. For example, does your BYOD, bring your own device policy, address the way that people are using technology, and give appropriate notice to the employees that at some point, indeed, you may be asking for that iPhone device because even though it's a personal device, it's implicated in a business investigation. That's just one example. In the security area, I think it's important for people to get their arms around where their data is located. We sometimes call this asset management or data mapping. Do you know where your most vital intellectual property resides, where your trade secrets are? If they're walking around on thumb drives and everybody's got them in their back pocket, that might not be the best strategy, and you might want to consolidate that information on a central server, for example. By the same token, you may want to address how is the employee accessing information not just from work, but also from home, using a personal device or a mobile device, and how might that person be accessing information when they're traveling on the road. This is important specifically with regard to trade secrets and proprietary information, but you also want to make sure you have good security around what they call personally identifiable information that might relate to your employees or your consumers out in the marketplace. And lastly, with regard to litigation, I think it's important for people to get more serious about a pretrial conference, sometimes nicknamed a Rule 26 conference in federal court. Both in federal and state court, there's an opportunity, and indeed these days a requirement, for parties to sit down and talk about their data. Most of the time, people jump forward and think about the trial, but they need to back up and think about that pretrial conference, because that's a multi-million-dollar event these days. Can you limit the dates that are involved and date restrict the data that you need to go collect? Can you limit the number of people that you need to collect about? And can you take, for example, deleted data or backup tapes off the table because that would be very expensive to process? Speaking of custodians, it's very important to see if you can limit the number of custodians involved in any particular case, because as we already have discussed, the scope of any one person's piece of information about an investigation may be very broad, and that one piece of paper, that memo that we talked about, may actually show up in several different places. So to the extent you can limit the number of individuals involved in an investigation, you're going to dramatically reduce the amount of data you have to collect in the first place. And finally, when you're talking about litigation, I think it's important to recognize you're often going to have a gatekeeping function that's going to enter the litigation or the investigation if you're talking internally. And that gatekeeping function is going to be somebody, an internal investigator, an outside expert or examiner, who often is going to a private individual and saying to them, we're going to protect your privacy, we're going to protect that home information, and we're only going to keyword search and bring forward the information that's directly pertinent to this investigation. That's happening more and more, probably about 80% of the cases that I'd see. And so I think thinking about your litigation strategy and realizing that there's going to be a gatekeeping function at some point in the process can be very helpful in the long run.
Our guest today has been Paul Luehr. Paul is the Managing Director and Chief Privacy Officer for Stroz Friedberg. He was a guest at a forum today for CEBC members where he talked about some of the trends in technology and what's the impact on ethical environments, particularly when we need to conduct an internal investigation. Paul, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you very much for viewing with us today. Have a wonderful day.
It's been great. Thank you.